So for 24, the first thing you're going to do is it said rearrange the terms in descending order. Typically, this is the easiest way to factor. So you want to rewrite it. You want to say 3x squared plus 24x plus 36. The next thing is to factor out the common monomial. So greatest common factor here between the numbers, 3, 24, and 36 is a 3. The variables, you can't take anything out. You have an x squared and x, and the last one doesn't have anything to give you. So we're going to factor out the 3. We're going to say 3, and then we have x squared plus 8x plus 12. Now we're ready to unfoil. We're ready to break it up into 2 parentheses. We're going to look at this 12 and say I need 2 numbers that multiply to give me positive 12. It's either 2 positives or 2 negatives. So I'm going to look here and say, oh, it's going to be 2 positives. So I need factors of 12 that add up to 8. That's 6 and 2. That's where we get my 6 and my 2. So my final factoring, I leave my common factor out on the outside, and I have a positive 6 and a positive 2. X plus 6, x plus 2. And that's how I get my factoring there. I'm going to do the same thing to the second one. The first thing I need to do, though, is rearrange it. So I'm going to rewrite it 4x squared minus 44x plus 96. All right. And then between the numbers, the 4 can come out. So I take a 4 out. I have x squared minus 11x plus 24. Again, I'm going to look at this last term. Factors of 24, that they either have to be positive, positive, or negative, negative to get a positive 24 when I multiply. So I'm going to look here and say, oh, they're going to be negative, negative. So 2 numbers that add up to give me negative 11, but they multiply to give me positive 24. That is negative 8 and negative 3. Negative 8 plus negative 3 is negative 11. Negative 8 times negative 3 is positive 24. So that's how I got my minus 8 minus 3. And make sure that you keep that common factor on the outside that you took out to begin with. The last one we need to rearrange first. So if I rearrange it, I'm going to put my x to the 4th first. Then I'm going to put my 6x cubed, then my minus 16x squared. If I look at the numbers, I actually can't take anything out. 1 is my greatest common factor between the numbers. But when I look at my variables, I can take something out. I have 4 x's, I have 3 x's, I have 2 x's, which means I can take 2 of them out. So my greatest common factor here is x squared. If I took 2 x's out, this only has 2 x's left. If I took 2 x's out here, this guy has 1 x. And if I took 2 x's out here, that one has none. Now I'm going to look at my last term. Again, I need to multiply to get a negative 16. The only way that's possible is to have 1 positive and 1 negative. So now I'm looking for factors of 16, 1 positive and 1 negative that add together to give me a 6, all right? So 8 and 2 multiply to give me 16. If I have a negative 8 and a positive 2, that would be a negative 6. If I have a positive 8 and a negative 2, that would be a positive 6. So a positive 8 and a negative 2 will add to give me 6, and they will multiply to give me negative 16. That is what I'm going to put in here. And again, you could say x minus 2, x plus 8. The order doesn't matter as long as the plus is with the 8 and the minus is with the 2, and as long as I left that x squared on the outside there. So factor by grouping is something that you're going to do when you have 4 terms. We've been dealing with things that have 3 terms, trinomials, all right? And for the trinomials, the first method that we've done is just looking at the last term and using those factors to create my 2 binomials. Now we're going to look at something that has 4 terms. It is called factor by grouping because the first thing you do is group. You group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. And we're going to group them by actually putting parentheses around them. We are going to then factor out the greatest common factor from each of our groups. So the second step is to take the first 2 terms alone and look at a common factor between those. And then we're going to look at the last 2 terms and take out the common factor between those. Once you do that, what's left in your parentheses should look the same if it can be factored by grouping. And then we're going to do actually just like one of our examples we did from the first section here. We're going to have the same term. That's going to be our common factor, and we're going to pull that out. And so then we're going to end up with two binomials, basically, is what we're going to end up with. All right. I will say one thing they don't talk about here is sometimes, and not on this particular handout, but when we get into a little bit larger ones, sometimes all four terms can have a common factor. And so if all four terms have something in common before you start, you would actually take that out, just like we did on our bell work. All right. But for this handout, we're not going to do common factors just yet. We're just going to do factor by grouping. So let's look at the first one, and we're going to do this one together. We're going to do a couple of them together, and then I'm going to have you do a couple of them. All right. So my first step then is to group. I am going to put grouping symbols around the first two terms, and then grouping symbols around the last two terms. All right. Then I'm going to look at these groups individually. I'm going to say between 30 and 48, what is the largest number that those two have in common? So what goes into 30 and into 48? 6. So I'm going to take a 6 out. What about the variables? Can I take any variables out of this group? Yeah, 2 of my x's, so x squared. And then I am going to take that out just like I have been doing. So 30 divided by 6 is 5. And then I took 2 of my x's out, so this one just has an x left. Bring down your minus. 48 divided by 6 is 8. I took both of my x's out, so I don't have any x's left. In the second group, between the 5 and the 8, do I have anything in common? What about my variables? No. So when you're factor by grouping, if nothing can come out, there's always a number that is in common to every number on the planet here. What is the number that's in common to everything? A 1. And so I am going to put a 1 there. Right? Always put the 1, because with factor by grouping, you're going to need it. All right, so if you don't have anything in common, just put a 1 there. Now, when I look at these two things, you should recognize that the two groups have something in common. And by group, I mean this compared to this has something in common. What is it? 5. The 5x minus 8. The entire binomial is in common. And so I am going to take that out, and I'm going to pull it out and say I have 5x minus 8 here. That's going to be my first group. My second group is going to be what is left over. So what's left over here is a 6x squared. So that is going to be there. And what is left over here is a plus 1. And that is my factor by grouping. All right, that is my factor by grouping. I can always check factoring. How can I check my factoring to see if this is correct? Yeah, I can FOIL. And so if I were to FOIL this, I would say 5x times 6x squared, that is 30x cubed. 5x times 1 is 5x. Negative 8x times 6x squared is negative 48x squared. Negative 8 times positive 1 is negative 8. If I were to put this in standard form, 30x cubed minus 48x squared plus 5x minus 8, that is what I started with. This is the correct factoring. So this is my answer. So you'll notice here I have first terms, second terms, right? I have a first group and a second group. So if I were to group this here, that's all fine. But here, when I group it inside the parentheses, I have technically taken out a negative. All right? I took a negative out of this guy because he went from -4 to +4. So I divided a negative out. But here, I should have pulled a negative out as well. Anytime you group behind a minus sign, you have to change the sign of the last term. Whatever he is, change it to the opposite. All right? I grouped behind a minus. So this group ended up behind a minus sign. When that happens, you have to change the last sign here. Just the last one. I technically already changed this sign. This sign went from a -4x, and inside the parentheses, he's a +4x. So technically, I already changed his sign. I need to change this one as well. So this is a positive, which means I need to change this sign to be a -3 there. Had it been a -3 there, I would have changed it to a +3 there. All right? Whatever the last term is, you change the sign to be the opposite. And then I am going to treat the rest of this exactly the same. I'm going to look at my 12 and my 9. What's the largest number that goes into 12 and into 9? 3. What about my variables? How many x's can I take out? I can only take an x squared out. And then I'm just going to do division. 12 divided by 3. That gives me 4. 9, and then my x's. I took 2 out. I have an x. 9 divided by 3. That's going to give me a 3. And then I took both x's out. In my second group, can I take anything out between the 4x and the 3? No. So what do I need to put there when I cannot take anything out? A 1. And this is going to be 4x, and we changed this sign, so it is -3. So now I'm going to look at these two, and I'm going to say between the two groups, this group and this group, what do they have in common? Yeah, they have the 4x minus 3 in common. And then my next group is going to be what's left over. 3x squared is left over here, and -1 is left over there. So my two groups are 4x minus 3 and 3x squared minus 1. Again, if you wanted to check this, you can FOIL it. And when you FOIL it, you should get what you started with up here, even to the negatives. So you should get 12x cubed minus 9x squared minus 4x plus 3 if you were to FOIL this. All right? Questions on factoring or grouping behind a negative? All right, let's try one. So when you have multiple variables, you're going to treat it exactly the same. You're going to treat your positives and negatives the same. You're going to look at your common factors the same way. You just have to consider all the variables. So for this one, I'm going to start the same way I did the other ones. I am going to group. I'm grouping behind a positive, so I don't have to do anything with my signs. And then I'm going to look at my numbers and my variables. So between my numbers, what can come out? A 2, right? And then variables, yeah. So look at my x's. This has x cubed. This has x squared. What am I going to take out? X squared. What about my y's? Y squared. All right. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I took out 2 of my 3 x's. I have an x. I took both my y's out. What about this? What is 2x squared y squared divided by 2x squared y squared? It's just a 1. So anytime you have divided out your numbers and taken all your variables out, you are dividing a number by itself. So you need to put a -1 there. It's not 0. It is a number divided by itself. So it is a 1. In the second group, I can take a 3. What about my variables? What can I take out? Just the z. Here, I've taken 3 divided by 3 is 1. I've taken my z's out. I have an x. What's left here?
1.
Also a 1. And then I am going to pull my common group out. X minus 1 is what I have in common. What's left over is 2x squared y squared, and then plus 3z. And again, this is my answer. When you get something like a worksheet and you check it, and I'm going to get this question all the time, this is the same answer, all right? So as long as the 2x squared y squared goes with the plus 3, and the x goes with the -1, these two are exactly the same. If you FOILed them, you would get the same answer. It is multiplication. So order does not matter. 2 times 3 equals 3 times 2. So the group and the group can be switched as long as what is in the group is correct. All right? Questions on multiple variables. All right, go ahead and try one.